The wind in the northern wilderness is a thing alive. It twists and hums through the endless forests, wailing against the glass of cabin windows, crawling beneath doors like a ghost searching for warmth. It carries whispers, soft, broken murmurs that no one can quite understand. The locals say it's the land remembering the lost, remembering those who never came back. In December, the darkness stretches for nearly 20 hours, swallowing the Alaskan landscape whole. The sun rises weak and pale, then vanishes behind the mountains before it's truly begun, leaving behind a blue-tinted twilight that never ends. It's the kind of place where silence feels like pressure on your chest, where even sound hesitates to travel. Claire Monroe had grown up in Anchorage, but her family's cabin near the Susitna River had been part of her childhood. Those quiet summers fishing with her father, the smell of pine sap and campfire smoke, the low hum of mosquitoes. But she hadn't been back there since her parents sold it to another family years ago. When she heard it had been put up for sale again, she decided to visit just for a weekend to see what memories still lingered there. She left Anchorage before dawn on December 14, 2018. Her old Subaru packed with a duffel bag, a thermos of coffee, and a camera. Her sister Lila had tried to talk her out of it. "It's not safe up there alone, Claire. Roads freeze, people get stranded, animals." Claire laughed it off, saying she needed a break from city noise. But there was something else behind her decision, something she hadn't told anyone. 2 nights earlier, she had dreamt of the cabin. Not as it was in her childhood, but darker, colder. In her dream, the windows were black and someone stood inside, tall and unmoving. When she woke, she could still feel the weight of eyes watching her through the dark. She told herself it was nothing. A dream, just a dream. Still, when she drove north that morning, the memory of it lingered like frost in her chest. The road to Talkeetna was narrow, lined with endless stretches of snow-laden spruce and birch. The car heater struggled against the bitter cold, and her windshield fogged every few miles. Every so often, she'd pass a truck heading the opposite way, its headlights flaring briefly before disappearing into the distance. The isolation was both beautiful and oppressive. There was something about the Alaskan wilderness that made you feel small, as if you didn't quite belong there. The land didn't care about you. It could take you without hesitation and never give you back. By early afternoon, snow began to fall, thick, heavy flakes that blurred the trees into white ghosts. Claire's tires crunched over ice and she slowed, gripping the wheel tightly. Her GPS flickered in and out, the signal dying in the remote valley. That's when she noticed the car behind her. A black truck maybe 20 feet back, its headlights dull and yellow through the snow. At first she thought nothing of it. There were hunters and trappers who used the same route. But when she slowed down near a curve, the truck slowed too. When she sped up, it did the same. She watched it in the rearview mirror for several miles, her heartbeat quickening. Finally, she reached for her phone and snapped a photo. The snow, the winding road ahead, and faintly, the glow of headlights behind her. She sent it to Lila with a quick message. "Feels like someone's following me." The photo went through, but there was no reply. Signal lost. The truck was gone when she looked again, swallowed by the storm or maybe by the curve of the road. She breathed out a shaky laugh, telling herself she was just being paranoid, but a small, cold certainty had rooted itself somewhere inside her. Something had been there, watching, waiting. As daylight faded, she finally reached the turnoff that led toward the old property. The road narrowed into a rough trail, half buried in snow and hemmed in by trees that seemed to lean closer the deeper she went. Her headlights cut long, pale tunnels through the darkness, the snowflakes catching light like falling ash. She slowed to a stop when she reached a clearing. There it was, the cabin, smaller than she remembered, slouched slightly under the weight of time. Smoke still stained the chimney stone from fires long dead. For a moment she just sat in the car, engine idling, staring. The forest around her was utterly silent. Then she noticed something strange, footprints in the snow. They led from the tree line to the front porch. Her first thought was that someone must have been squatting here. Maybe hunters, maybe a drifter. But as she looked closer through the windshield, she realized the tracks weren't recent. They were half filled with fresh snow softened around the edges. And there were two sets of them. One smaller, light, probably hers from years ago when she was a kid playing near the cabin. The other was large, bare, and deep, as though whoever made them had been heavier, maybe taller. They stopped right in front of the door. Claire shut off the engine and sat in the sudden quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound your body makes. The faint thud of your heartbeat. The whisper of your breath. She tried to convince herself it was an animal, or maybe the wind playing tricks on the snow, but there was something too deliberate about those tracks, too human. Slowly, she reached for her phone again. No signal, no bars, nothing. She thought about turning around heading back to town, but the nearest one was nearly an hour away, and night was closing in fast. She grabbed her flashlight, stepped out of the car, and immediately felt the cold bite her face. The air smelled of pine and iron, sharp and clean. Her boots crunched in the snow as she made her way to the porch, the beam of her light flickering over the old wooden boards. The footprints were clearer now, bare feet, definitely human. Larger than hers by several inches. She felt her throat tighten. Whoever had been here must have been out in the cold without shoes. That made no sense. The door creaked when she pushed it open, and the smell of dust and decay washed over her. The air inside was stale, untouched for years. Everything looked the same. The worn furniture, the old rug, even the crooked picture of the mountains that her father had hung above the fireplace. She walked deeper inside, shining her light across the walls. The quiet was suffocating, pressing against her eardrums. She whispered her father's name without meaning to, as if he might answer. Instead, something else did. A faint sound like a soft sigh from somewhere near the back room. She froze. The beam of her flashlight trembled against the wall. She waited, breath held, listening. Nothing. Maybe the wind, she thought again. Just the wind. She turned to leave. But before she reached the door, her light caught something carved into the wooden frame near the window. At first, she thought it was a scratch, but when she brushed the frost away, she saw letters, roughly etched, uneven. "Stay out." The words were old, the grooves darkened with age. Her pulse quickened. Someone had left that message long before her visit. Someone who knew something she didn't. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning through the trees like a voice too far away to understand. She took one last look at the cabin, then decided she'd had enough. She didn't care about nostalgia or childhood memories anymore. She just wanted to leave. But when she stepped off the porch, she saw it. The second set of footprints again, fresher this time, leading from the side of the cabin into the woods. The snow was still falling, yet the tracks remained crisp and sharp as if newly made. She lifted her flashlight toward the tree line, and for a split second, she thought she saw movement. Something tall, thin, watching. Her breath hitched. Then the light flickered and the shape was gone. Only the trees stood there, their branches swaying gently. She backed toward her car, heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear the wind anymore. She climbed inside, locked the doors, and sat in the dark. Snow gathered on the windshield, dulling the world to white. She tried the ignition, but the engine sputtered once, then died. The headlights dimmed, and for a brief, terrible moment, she saw her own reflection in the glass, except it wasn't moving like she was. It just stared. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Claire Monroe alive. 3 days later, her car was found exactly where she'd left it. Engine dead, keys still inside, footprints leading into the woods. 2 sets, one belonging to her, the other larger, barefoot. And halfway through the forest, where the snow grew deeper and the light could barely reach, the second trail simply ended, as if the thing walking beside her had never been there at all. Detective Aaron Delaney had seen Alaska at its worst. Men frozen in snowdrifts, hunters torn apart by bears, drifters swallowed by rivers so cold they kept secrets. But the Monroe case felt different from the moment he read the report. There was something in the details that gnawed at him, something that refused to make sense. He had driven the same road north, through the same forest Claire had vanished in, with the same silence pressing on his thoughts. He tried not to imagine the moment she must have realized she wasn't alone. In Alaska, people vanish every year. Planes, hikers, even whole campsites. But there was a particular strangeness to this one. The footprints. The locked car. The lack of struggle. As if she had simply stepped out into the woods because something, or someone, had called her name. When Delaney reached the site where Claire's car had been found, the search teams were gone. Only a few faded marker flags still poked out of the snow like little graves. The air was sharp, biting against his face, and the cold had that peculiar stillness that only came after a storm. He circled the Subaru slowly, notebook in hand, eyes scanning every inch of ground. The prints had been photographed before they were covered, but seeing them in person, or what was left of them, made something inside him twist. The pattern was wrong. The human brain knows instinctively how a footprint should look, how the snow should bend under weight. These weren't like that. The larger ones, the barefoot set, were too clean. No melt pattern, no drag, no compression. They seemed almost pressed into the snow rather than made by weight. He crouched down, brushing away a dusting of powder, tracing one with his gloved finger. It was as if the snow itself had remembered the shape of something that had only half existed. The case had already gone cold. 3 days in the Alaskan wilderness meant the odds were nearly zero. Still, Delaney drove to Anchorage to meet Claire's parents. The Monroe home was small, neat, and too quiet. Her mother, Margaret, was sitting by the window, staring out at the gray light with eyes that looked as if they hadn't slept in days. Her father, Richard, was silent, his hands gripping a mug that had long gone cold. The moment Delaney entered, the air felt heavy. Grief has a way of clinging to walls. Margaret led him to the kitchen table where a cardboard box sat. "She left this," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "A week before she disappeared. Said it was just old stuff she wanted us to keep safe." The handwriting on the top of the box stopped him cold. It read, "For when I'm gone." Inside were photographs, neatly stacked, mostly of the family cabin through the years. Summer trips, fishing, birthdays. But one photograph, older and faded, drew his attention. It was from 1993. Richard stood near the cabin, holding a small girl. Claire couldn't have been more than 3. And behind them, barely visible in the tree line, was something that made Delaney's skin prickle. At first it looked like a trick of shadow, a shape between the trunks. But when he tilted the photo under the light, the outline became clearer. A tall, narrow figure, easily 7 feet, standing perfectly still. Its proportions were wrong. Too long in the limbs, its face turned not toward the camera, but toward the child. Delaney looked up. "Do you remember this?" Margaret nodded, pale. "I've hated that picture since the day we took it." There was no one there when we looked. Not a soul. I told Richard to burn it, but he didn't believe in things like that. Richard's voice cracked through the silence. "It's just shadows." "Don't start with that again." But Margaret shook her head. "You think I didn't see it? You think I didn't hear it? That winter something was out there. The dogs would bark all night. Once we found tracks behind the cabin, bare feet in the snow, just like you said." Her hands trembled as she reached for another item in the box. It was an old letter, brittle at the edges, written in her husband's handwriting. He never mailed this. I found it years later. Delaney read the first few lines. "To whoever buys this land, don't go out after dark. Don't answer when you hear your name." "It's not the wind." He stared at Richard. "You wrote this?" The man looked away. "It was a joke," he muttered. But the way his eyes flickered told Delaney otherwise. "We had an incident. Someone went missing before we moved there. A hunter. Locals said the woods were haunted, that the land was cursed. Nonsense stories. This state is full of them. Still, Delaney couldn't shake the image of that photograph. Later that evening, he had the evidence scanned at the station, zooming in on the shadowed figure until the pixels broke apart. There was something inhuman about the way it stood, its posture too still, too deliberate. Not quite animal, not quite man, and behind the grain of the photograph something else seemed wrong. The figure wasn't standing on the ground. Its feet faded into the white like fog. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. He'd been on the force long enough to know when his mind was playing tricks on him, but the longer he stared, the less certain he felt. The next morning, he made up his mind to visit the cabin himself. The road was worse than he expected, frozen hard, slick with ice. His truck shuddered over the ruts as the forest grew denser. The trees here were tall, ancient, their branches knitted so thickly that daylight barely reached the ground. He found the cabin just before dusk, sitting like a corpse among the snow. Its windows were black, the roof heavy with frost. He killed the engine and stepped out. The cold wrapped around him instantly, sharp enough to bite through layers. Inside, the air was stale, untouched since the search. The team had cataloged everything: Claire's phone, her camera bag, a few scattered notes. But there was one thing they hadn't mentioned: the journal on the kitchen table. A leather-bound book half buried under a pile of maps. He flipped it open carefully. Claire's handwriting was small, tidy, and increasingly frantic toward the end. I saw it again tonight, between the trees. It doesn't move when I look straight at it, only when I turn away. I keep thinking it's my reflection in the window, but it's not. It stands too tall. Delaney's breath clouded in the air. He turned the page. It knows my name. I heard it whisper from the woods. I tried not to listen. Dad used to tell stories about something in these forests, something that watched but never left tracks. I thought he was trying to scare us, but now I know why they sold the place. The final entry was dated the day she vanished. Just 6 words. It's inside the house, not alone. He froze, staring at the words until his reflection blurred in the glossy ink. He checked his surroundings, the door still open behind him, the silence pressing down. Slowly, he pulled out his recorder and clicked it on. His voice sounded too loud in the emptiness as he described the scene, the temperature, the condition of the room. Then, just as he was about to speak again, he heard something, a faint tapping sound coming from behind the far wall. He turned his flashlight toward it. The tapping stopped. He waited. Then it came again, slower this time, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm of knuckles against wood. Delaney drew his weapon, moving toward the sound. His boots creaked across the old floorboards. The noise shifted, something scraping as if dragging across the wall. Then silence. He spoke into the recorder, his voice lower now. There's movement behind the north wall. Could be animal activity. Investigating. He pushed open the door to the back room. Empty. Dust motes floated in his flashlight beam. He stepped closer to the wall and ran his hand along the rough wood. Cold. Too cold. Like something was leaching the heat from the air. Then just as he turned away, he heard it. A whisper, faint and unmistakable. His name. He froze. The sound had come from outside, through the wall, through the snow. Aaron. It was soft, almost tender, like someone calling him from far away. His skin prickled beneath his coat. He walked to the window and shone his light into the darkness. Snow reflected back, silent and empty. But then he saw the prints. A trail leading away from the cabin, fresh, pressed cleanly into the powder. Barefoot, human. He swallowed hard, breath trembling in the cold air. The footprints stopped near the tree line, fading into the dark. He followed them for a few steps, gun raised, every instinct screaming that he shouldn't. The forest seemed to breathe around him, branches shifting, the wind whispering things he couldn't quite hear, and then he saw it, or thought he did. A figure standing between the trees, tall and motionless, the shape of a person but wrong in the way shadows are wrong, longer, stretched, unreal. He blinked and it was gone. Only the whisper of the wind remained. But this time it wasn't saying his name. It was laughing. When Delaney returned to his truck, he didn't speak for a long time. He just sat in the driver's seat, hands shaking, recorder still running. He listened to the playback later that night. Through the static, his own breathing filled the silence, and then just barely another voice whispered back, not his, a woman's, soft, distant echoing. "Help me." It sounded exactly like Claire Monroe. The forest around the Susitna was the kind of silence that pressed against your ribs. Detective Delaney returned to the cabin before sunrise the next morning, drawn there by something he couldn't name, something that felt less like curiosity and more like compulsion. The temperature had dropped overnight and frost clung to every branch like glass veins. The trail was nearly buried now, but he could still see faint depressions where the barefoot tracks had been. He parked farther down the road this time and walked in, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots, the cold air burning his lungs. He wasn't sure why he'd come back. He told himself it was to collect more evidence, maybe take another look at Claire's journal before forensics arrived to box everything up. But deep down he knew it wasn't that. It was the voice. The whisper that had called his name the night before. It hadn't been the wind, he was sure of it. He could still hear it in his head, soft and hollow, like someone calling from beneath ice. The cabin looked smaller in the daylight. The roof sagged under snow, the windows glazed opaque with frost. He hesitated on the porch, one hand on the doorframe, and glanced toward the tree line. Everything was still. No movement, no sound, only the faint hum of the wind weaving through the trees. He stepped inside, boots thudding softly on the floorboards, and the air seemed to change the moment he crossed the threshold. The cold inside wasn't natural. It was heavy, damp, the kind of chill that came from something ancient. On the kitchen table, Claire's journal waited exactly where he'd left it. He flipped it open to the last few pages again, rereading her final entries. The handwriting looked more frantic than before, the strokes uneven like she had been shaking when she wrote. "It's inside the house. Not alone." He traced the words with a gloved finger, feeling the pressure she must have used as if she had been trying to dig the words into the paper itself. He took a deep breath and began recording. Detective Delaney, December 17th, returning to the Monroe property for a follow-up survey. Interior temperature significantly lower than expected. Suspect evidence of environmental anomaly, possibly drafts from old insulation or structural decay. His voice sounded too calm for what he felt. He forced himself to move slowly through the cabin, describing everything aloud. It was an old habit, talking through the fear. The living room was small, with an old stone fireplace blackened from years of use. Above it hung a faded painting of the mountains, the same one Claire had mentioned in her childhood notes. Something about it unsettled him. The paint looked warped, as if the landscape had been melted and smeared. He moved closer, shining his flashlight along the edges of the frame. That's when he saw it. Tiny scratches along the wood like claw marks deep enough to cut through varnish. They ran in uneven vertical lines, some overlapping, others curling like letters. When he leaned closer, he realized they weren't random. Someone or something had carved words. "I see you." He stepped back fast, heart hammering. The air felt tighter now, thinner, as if the cabin itself were breathing. He checked the back door again. Still closed. The snow outside was undisturbed. He turned toward the hallway, his flashlight cutting through the dim. The beam wavered across the walls, more scratches, faint outlines of something that could have been faces if you looked too long. A sudden thump came from upstairs. Not loud but distinct, a weight shifting on old wood. He froze, hand gripping his weapon. For a moment he thought it might have been snow falling from the roof. Then came another sound, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing just above him. One step, then another, then silence. He climbed the stairs carefully, each creak echoing through the empty house. The upper floor was small, Only 2 rooms and a narrow hallway. His breath came out in quick bursts of fog. "State troopers," he called, voice steady though his hands trembled. "If someone's here, make yourself known." No answer. The first room was empty except for a bed frame and a cracked mirror propped against the wall. Dust covered everything. The second room had no furniture at all, only a broken chair and frost creeping in through the window. He was about to turn back when something flickered in the mirror, a movement that didn't belong to him. He swung his light toward it, pulse slamming in his throat. Nothing, just his reflection staring back, pale and tense. He lowered the flashlight slowly, but his reflection didn't move with him. It stayed perfectly still. His body froze, the kind of paralysis that comes when the mind refuses to process what it sees. He blinked hard, and in that instant the reflection smiled. He stumbled back, hitting the wall, eyes wide. The glass fogged slightly, and when he looked again, his reflection was normal, mirroring his own fear perfectly. He stood there for a long moment, heart racing before stepping forward to touch the mirror. His fingers brushed the glass. It was cold but wet. When he pulled his hand back, there was moisture on his glove, condensation maybe, or breath. The cabin groaned around him. Wood shifted. Somewhere beneath the floor, a faint scraping started again, the same sound from the night before. He moved downstairs fast, scanning every shadow. The noise grew louder as he approached the kitchen wall. Then he noticed something he hadn't seen earlier. The faint outline of a door hidden behind a coat of cracked paint. A crawl space. The edges had been sealed over years ago. He pried his knife from his belt and scraped along the line until a section of wood came loose. The air that spilled out was colder than the rest of the house, smelling faintly of rot and earth. He angled his flashlight inside. A narrow tunnel sloped downward beneath the cabin, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. The dirt walls glistened with frost. Every instinct in him screamed to stop, to turn around, to call it in. But he found himself kneeling anyway, ducking his head and crawling inside. The walls brushed against his shoulders, flakes of frozen soil falling onto his coat. The tunnel curved slightly before opening into a small, hollowed-out space beneath the cabin's foundation. He aimed his light around and froze. Scattered across the ground were old belongings. A torn jacket, a rusted lantern, a photograph half buried in ice. He picked it up carefully. It was a portrait, faded almost beyond recognition, but he could just make out the outline of a man in a hunter's coat, smiling. The back was dated 1986, the year a hunter had gone missing near this very property. He looked deeper into the small chamber and saw something else. Imprints in the dirt, faint but clear. Bare feet. His light flickered once, then steadied. He turned toward the tunnel entrance. A shape was blocking it. For a moment, his mind couldn't accept what it saw. The light caught the outline of legs, long, too long, and a face half hidden in shadow. It wasn't moving, but he could feel its attention, like static crawling under his skin. He raised his weapon. "State troopers, don't move!" His voice sounded far away, muffled by the cold air. The figure tilted its head impossibly slow like a curious animal. Then it vanished. Gone. One blink, and it wasn't there. The tunnel entrance was clear. He scrambled out, stumbling into the kitchen, gasping, eyes darting to every corner. His flashlight caught something new on the floorboards, wet footprints leading away from the crawl space. He followed them to the front door where they simply stopped. Not faded, not melted, stopped. He backed toward the wall, trying to steady his breathing, and clicked the recorder on again. There's something here. Not human, possibly an intruder, no visible tracks beyond entry point. He stopped. The sound of whispering filled the room, soft and layered like a dozen voices speaking at once. He turned, spinning in place, but they were everywhere. Inside the walls, the floor, his head. Then one voice rose above the others. A woman's voice. "Aaron," he swallowed hard, throat dry. "Claire?" The name escaped before he could stop it. The whisper came again, closer this time, warm against his ear. "Help me?" He turned sharply, and for an instant she was there, standing in the hallway, pale and barefoot, her hair wet with frost, her eyes too dark to be human. He fired. The sound shattered the silence, echoing through the cabin like thunder. The figure was gone before the echo faded. No blood, no sign of impact, just the lingering smell of gunpowder and the faint imprint of bare feet in the snow outside the open door. Delaney lowered his weapon slowly. His hands were shaking. He knew he should leave, call for backup, get out of there while he still could, but some part of him couldn't move. The air outside shimmered faintly, the snow shifting as though disturbed by something invisible. And faintly, just beyond the trees, he saw her again. Claire, or something that wore her shape. She stood perfectly still, watching him, her face expressionless. Then, without moving her lips, her voice came again, inside his head this time. "You shouldn't have come back." He blinked once and she was gone. Only the endless white remained, the forest swallowing every sound. When Delaney finally made it back to his truck, his recorder was still running. The last thing it captured before the battery died was the sound of him whispering into the cold, broken voice trembling with disbelief. "It's not a man," he said quietly. "It's something else. It wears their faces." Then, through the static, came a faint, distant sound. Footsteps crunching in the snow, moving closer and closer, until the recording ended in silence. By dawn, the snow had stopped, leaving the woods around the Susitna River draped in an eerie silver stillness. The search team that went looking for Detective Delaney that morning found his truck parked exactly where he'd left it, engine still running, headlights dimmed by frost. The door hung open, his footprints leading only a few yards into the trees before vanishing like breath on glass. On the passenger seat lay his service pistol, one bullet missing from the magazine, and his voice recorder still running beneath a layer of ice. The men who found it later said they had never heard anything like the sounds it captured. Soft whispers, faint laughter, and the dull rhythm of breathing that wasn't human. The department called it a disappearance. Environmental hazards, they said, like the land itself had swallowed him. But those who knew Delaney, those who had heard the recording, understood that something else had happened. The official report listed him as missing in action, presumed dead. Yet some of the searchers couldn't shake what they'd seen that morning. The snow near the tree line bore strange markings, not animal, not boot prints. The shapes were elongated, almost like hands pressed into the ice. In the weeks that followed, the story spread quietly through Alaska. Locals in Talkeetna whispered about the detective who had gone north to find a missing woman and joined her instead. The forest near the old Monroe cabin became a place no one went after dark. Trappers said their dogs refused to go near it. A few even claimed to have seen a figure wandering the river's edge at dusk, a woman in a red parka, barefoot, her hair frozen stiff, her eyes black as obsidian. One of those who claimed to see her was a man named Henry Barlow, a retired logger who lived in a cabin not far from the trail. He came into town one January evening, face pale as chalk, hands trembling as he told his story to the bartender at the roadhouse. He said he'd been chopping wood when he noticed movement through the trees, a flash of color against the white. At first he thought it was a moose hunter. Then he realized it was a woman walking slowly through the snow, barefoot, her feet leaving no tracks. He called out, asking if she was lost. She turned toward him, smiled faintly, and said, "It's so cold." Her voice, he said, sounded like two people speaking at once, one beneath the other. When he blinked, she was gone. Only the trees stood there, tall and black against the dying light. He didn't stay to look again. By the time he told the story in town, his hands were shaking too hard to hold his glass. Back in Anchorage, Delaney's personal effects were returned to evidence storage. His badge, his notepad, his phone, but the recorder, what was left of it, never made it into the official file. The audio was copied, studied, and then quietly locked away. The few who listened said it started with his usual report, steady and professional. Then came the sound of him breathing heavily, whispering into the dark. "It's not a man," he said. "It's older than this place. It doesn't take them, it copies them. It becomes them." Then, after a stretch of static, came the faintest of voices, a woman's voice, clear and calm, whispering something unintelligible before the tape cut off completely. The case was closed a month later. The file was labeled Unsolved, and the cabin was officially condemned. But some nights, pilots flying low over the valley swore they could see light flickering from the windows, like a lantern swinging in the dark. 3 months later, in late March, a snowmobile patrol reported a sighting near the frozen lake by the Susitna River. 2 troopers had been on night watch when they spotted movement, a woman standing alone in the middle of the ice. They described her as tall, thin, with long hair and a red jacket. She was motionless, her arms hanging at her sides, her gaze fixed toward the woods. The troopers called out, but she didn't respond. When one of them took a few cautious steps forward, she turned her head and smiled. A small, unsettling smile that didn't reach her eyes. They said her face looked exactly like Claire Monroe. Both men swore they saw her vanish. Not walk away, not run, simply fade into the mist as if the fog had swallowed her whole. The next morning, the ice where she'd stood was untouched, smooth as glass. But when they shone their flashlights closer, they saw something beneath the surface. Impressions, faint and human, pressed deep into the ice. Hands, faces, mouths, frozen mid-scream. The state sent an investigation team out there 2 days later. The area was sealed off for safety. The official explanation said gas pockets had caused visual distortions in the ice. But the photographs never reached the media. Someone ordered them sealed. One of the divers who went beneath the surface later told his wife he'd seen something moving under the ice. A shape that watched him, unmoving as he worked. He quit the next day and left Alaska entirely. In Talkeetna, the old-timers started calling it the Vanished. It wasn't just Claire anymore. Over the years, people kept disappearing along that stretch of land. Hunters, hikers, even a pair of journalists who came chasing the legend. Every time the snow melted in spring, they found new prints near the riverbank. Always barefoot, always leading nowhere. One autumn night, a couple camping nearby were awoken by the sound of laughter. Soft, broken, echoing through the trees. They thought it was another group of campers until the sound grew closer and closer, right outside their tent. The man unzipped the flap and shone his flashlight into the dark. A face stared back, pale, expressionless, inches from his own. It smiled and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." By morning, their campsite was empty, tent shredded open, snow disturbed in wide, sweeping circles like something had dragged them away. The authorities found no blood, no signs of a struggle. Only the woman's phone, its camera still recording. The final frame was nothing but white. Even now, years later, the story lingers. Truckers passing through the area say their radios cut out when they drive past the turnoff. Sometimes they hear static that sounds like breathing. Others claim to see shapes walking along the snowbanks that disappear when headlights touch them. A hiker once found a piece of cloth near the cabin ruins, a scrap of red fabric, stiff with ice. He didn't take it with him, said it felt warm to the touch despite the cold. The ruins of the Monroe cabin are nearly gone now, buried beneath layers of fallen timber and snow. But the locals say if you stand there at night, you can hear voices. Sometimes a woman calling softly for help. Sometimes a man answering her from the woods. The land has a way of keeping its ghosts. In Alaska, that's not superstition, it's warning. People vanish here all the time and the snow buries their names. But those who vanish near the Susitna aren't lost. They change. The cold takes them, reshapes them, and sends them back. There's an old saying among trappers in the north. The forest doesn't echo when something listens back. When the wind moves through the black spruce, they say it's not the air you're hearing. It's the voices of those who were taken, trying to remember the sound of their own names. Last winter, a ranger doing maintenance near the trailhead found something carved into a birch tree. The letters were shallow but clear, the wood split by age and frost. It said, "For when I'm gone." Beneath it, carved in the same uneven hand, were 3 words that hadn't been there before. "It found me. No one goes that far north anymore without reason." But sometimes, on clear nights when the aurora spills across the sky in green ribbons, you can see figures moving through the light, walking slowly between the trees. They look almost human, almost familiar. And if you listen carefully beneath the whisper of snow and the pulse of wind, you can hear a woman's voice, soft, steady, echoing from somewhere deep in the frozen dark. She says, "It's so cold." And sometimes, if you stay too long, it says your name too.